yet. Okay.
But will be now. Is on its way up.
Okay, yeah. We're now live. Right. Standby. You're okay, Sir Ayo?
Mic test, mic test. Whang-ud.
Oh, very good. We can hear you.
Okay.
All right.
Is my background familiar?
Yeah, you are. Okay, good. Yeah, in our program, there's like a few minutes more before we can start, but to allow time for participants to join us via Zoom as well as Facebook Live. But we should start in what time? In our program, we start at 1:20.
We are now live streaming.
Well, we can start earlier if you are ready. What's the pleasure of the body? All right. So we have our 3 speakers and our moderators. What do you think, Sir Ayod? Should we start like in 2-3 minutes? To give more time to speakers in case they want to say more. Okay. Okay. Okay, your call, Sir Ayo. So whenever all the speakers are ready and you're ready, we can start the afternoon session. Marami pa palang pumapasok eh. Marami pang participants na pumapasok sa Zoom. Sir Ayo, mag-rename ka para makita yung full name mo. And because Sir Ayo is our moderator, everyone is excited to see him here. Because he rarely shows himself up on events. So yeah, he is forced to show himself now.
Bro, nagdigusak mata.
Yeah. Okay. So what? May backup ka pa dyan na moderator, I'm sure. At may tanong na siya. Hindi ka pa nagsisimula, meron ng mga tanong sa'yo dito sa chat box. So,
Tahan nakadamdama dun. Audible man, mga ka na saya.
Yes. You're good. All right. Okay, so your call, you want to start now or in like 2 minutes? We have 168 participants now via Zoom and on Facebook.
Are we live in YouTube also?
In Facebook. So there's 42 joining us on Facebook for now. Yes. So the Q&A, Sir Ayo, will be after all the 3 speakers. But of course, our participants can type in their questions on the chat box. So we will have time to read through that, and the speakers can also read and prepare to answer those questions. Okay. All right. Your call, Sir Ayo. If you want to start now, go.
Sige, no, mabalik.
Mabalinen.
Yep.
Can now start, Kim. All right, Sir Ayo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second day of our PM sessions for the IPRA at 24 lecture series. This afternoon, we have 3 wonderful lectures from 3 wonderful speakers. Let me just introduce them before we begin. Our first speaker, ANALYN SALVADOR-AMORES, is a professor of anthropology and director of the Museo Cordilleran at the University of the Philippines, Baguio. She earned her master's and doctorate in social and cultural anthropology from Oxford University in the United Kingdom. Her research interests include non-Western aesthetics, material culture, ethnographic museums, and colonial photography in the Philippine Cordillera. Included in her work is the 2-time award-winning book Tapping Ink, Tattooing Identities, Tradition and Modernity in Contemporary Kalinga Society, published by the University of the Philippines Press in 2013, and the National Book Development Award for 2013, and National Academy of Science and Technology 2016. As a public service professor, she continues to engage Indigenous communities in her work and promoting Indigenous knowledge in different platforms. She actively carries out anthropological fieldwork among the Indigenous communities in Northern Luzon and have published extensively on the subject. Her paper presentation this afternoon is entitled Understanding Intellectual Property Rights, the Case of Whang-ud and the NAS Daily Controversy. Okay, our second speaker is Mr. FERNAN TALAMAYAN. FERNAN TALAMAYAN is a PhD candidate at the Institute of Social Research and Cultural Studies, National Ming Tung University in Taiwan. He holds a master's degree in history from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, 2014, and a second master's degree in sociology and social anthropology from the Central European University, Hungary, in 2018. His dissertation project investigates the populist logic and political language game in the Philippines, He also conducts research on marginalization of indigenous communities, colonial advertising, historical revisionism, and propaganda. His paper is entitled Commodifying Cultures, Negotiating Identities, the Reproduction and Performance of the Cordilleran Cultural Heritage in Tam-awan Village. Our third speaker, Mr. Edwin V. Antonio, or Dr. Edwin V. Antonio, is a cultural worker, healthcare worker, and educator. He is a former Philippine Youth Ambassador to the SHIP for Southeast Asian and Japanese Youth Program, or the SEAP, in 2002, and was selected as the national leader of the same program in 2014. He was inspired by his experience in the said program, so he put up an annual cultural exchange project in 2013 for the Philippine indigenous youth called Katutubo Exchange. He was able to bring the program in various parts of the country. Before the onset of the pandemic, he went on a cruise joining some 300 youth delegates from around the world and traveled to Japan and North America for the SHIP for World Youth 2020 program, where he was chosen by the Cabinet Office of Japan to serve as a member of the administrative staff and as a discussion facilitator for the course Cultural Heritage Preservation. He currently serves as the head of the National Committee on Northern Cultural Communities and secretary of the Subcommission for Cultural Communities and Traditional Arts of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, NCCA. His presentation is entitled Fostering Cross-Cultural Understanding Through the Case of Katutubo Exchange, Dr. Edwin V. Antonio. So we have 3 lectures this afternoon, which will be around 40 minutes each. May I encourage everyone to please type in your questions. Feel free to type in your questions, and we will be discussing them immediately after the 3 lectures are done. Also, after the lectures, please feel free to answer our document later, which will be distributed for the entire group. So is Dr. ANALYN SALVADOR-AMORES here? Yes, I think so.
Hi, Ayo. Good afternoon.
Hello, Ma'am Akin. Yes. Also, FERNAN TALAMAYAN, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, okay. Nice to hear from you. And of course, finally, our last speaker, Dr. Edwin Antonio, are you here?
Yes, naimbagal daw.
Naimbagal daw, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
Medyo mainit ang mga topics natin ngayon, so please try to expect that we will be having a very entertaining and a very educational exchange of questions and answers later on. So let's begin right now. So let's not waste our time. We will immediately start with our first lecture, Understanding Intellectual Property Rights, the Case of Whang-ud and the NAS Daily Controversy by Dr. ANALYN SALVADOR-AMORES.
Tradition and practices in general. So the topic assigned to me this afternoon is Understanding Indigenous Intellectual Property Rights, the Case of Whang-ud and the NAS Daily. I would like to begin this talk by reflecting on the key questions as points of discussion. 1, what are the specificities on the rights of indigenous peoples in relation to their cultural heritage? How does the Philippine government protect these rights? Who owns their art, tradition, and practices? In general terms, who owns their culture? Can they be commercially exploited? What are the grounds for such? And are they protected as an intellectual property rights? The Igorots, the indigenous communities in northern Luzon, Philippines, continue to be hunted to this day due to the countless issues of misrepresentation in the past and present. Issues of commodification and cultural appropriation have been, in recent years, one of the most widely discussed sources of ethical problems. The prevalence of these issues indicates the continuing challenge of indigenous peoples in certain aspects of their cultural identity. So this is a collection of photographs during the American colonial period, of tattooed Igorots from the Cordillera region, where they were considered as the other. From the past to the present, it is very difficult to disentangle this derogatory notion of the Igorots, especially with tattoos. For instance, the Kalinga, an ethno-linguistic group found in northern Luzon, is one of the communities that still practice batok, or traditional tattooing. Specifically among the Butbut in Tinglayan in southern Kalinga province. So this is the place where Whang-ud lives in Buscalan, and this was my field site in Bugnay in Tinglayan, Kalinga. This in Buscalan is where Whang-ud hails. Is once again faced with the controversy on the issues of cultural appropriation and questions on the ownership of culture, specifically on traditional tattoos. This is not the first time that they are confronted with the issues of cultural commodification and cultural exploitation. In fact, in 2012, there was a documentary produced by Discovery entitled Tattoo Hunter, where there were issues of cultural exploitation, in the same view with the Manila Film controversy in 2017. And through the years, I have witnessed this form of commodification where Whang-ud as a brand name and the Kalinga tattoos as a commodified product in sneakers, you have caps, t-shirts, coffee labels, among others. And recently, Whang-ud and Nas Daily controversy, which generated a lot of issues when Israeli vlogger Nasser Yassin, the content creator of the popular vlog site, offered a masterclass in tattooing featuring the 90-year-old tattoo practitioner Whang-ud, has caused a stir. I shall discuss this later in the other slides. Drawing from my own research in northern Luzon from the 1990s to the present, I would like to elucidate this issue further. After spending 16 months of anthropological fieldwork among the Butbut, I learned about batok, or the traditional tattoos found on the skins of the elderly men and women in the village. The narratives of the meanings and the relevance of how these tattoos mark their social status, political and religious affiliation, social biography, including the process on how tattoos was produced by the Manbabatok. Tattoos among the Butbut is a place-based ritual passed on from the one generation to the next. Traditionally, batok is learned by observation and by doing it, similar to how Whang-ud honed her skill as passed down to her by her elders. Whang-ud's tattoos has transformed into an increasingly commercialized practice with a diverse clientele, local and foreign tourists, and Filipinos in diaspora to travel to Buscalan to get tattoos from her. No doubt, the movement of Whang-ud tattoo-inspired works in the local and international market has generated rising interest on Kalinga tattoos. One of the key points for discussion that is highlighted is who owns their art, tradition, and practices. Is it by an individual or an entire community or another entity? Instead of asking who owns culture, when traditional practices are performed or appropriated by other groups, I asked, how can we promote respectful treatment of native culture and indigenous forms of self-expression within mass societies? What are the challenges we face and how do we negotiate this to be able to represent the indigenous peoples in the best possible way? What is the role of the nation state, the government, and its people in protecting these rights? For instance, in the Philippine government, there are laws that is supposedly to protect the rights of the indigenous peoples, such as the Republic Act 8371, or in the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. This is a landmark act that was implemented that concerns the indigenous peoples, which highlights the free, prior, informed consent. And then, of course, you have Philippine Cultural Heritage Law in 1994, as well as the Vice Edition in RA 10006, which is the Protection of National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009, wherein intangible cultural heritage is mentioned as part of the national identity of the Philippines. Therefore, it should be respected and protected. And of course, RA 8293, which is the Intellectual Property Code, which was implemented in 2015, where intangible cultural heritage is also part of this intellectual property of the nation. In light of this sustained appropriation and negative repercussions on this continued process of appropriation, it's also pertinent to review the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was passed on last September 2007. And in these articles 11, 20, and 30, it stresses the rights of indigenous peoples to maintain, control, protect, and develop their heritage, traditional knowledge and expressions, including designs, and their intellectual property rights over traditional cultural expressions. Part 2 of Article 11 stipulates that states shall provide redress, including restitution with respect to the indigenous people's cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent. Under RA 8371, or the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, it mandates the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP, to carry out the Philippine state's duty to promote and uphold the rights of indigenous peoples in order to rectify their historical marginalization. The IPRA recognizes and promotes the 4 bundles of rights, namely right to ancestral domain, right to self-determination, right to cultural heritage, and the right to social justice. I would like to focus on the rights of self-determination and cultural heritage, particularly in relation to its implementation of the principle of free and prior consent, and the creation of programs to integrate indigenous peoples and their traditional structures into existing mainstream institutions. In a study conducted by an interdisciplinary team of UP Baguio faculty, they report that while the government claims that no complaint against FPIC implementation exists, various case studies and newspaper accounts have documented serious problems related to FPIC process as conducted in indigenous communities all over the Philippines. Recently, the case of Whang-ud and the NAS Daily controversy, where Grace Palica's niece of Whang-ud, who claimed that there was no consent from the community in relation to the participation of Whang-ud to teach traditional tattooing online via the digital platform through the NAS Daily. In particular, when knowledge is rooted in local constructions and exposed to the global world as an empowering representation or an oppressive misrepresentation. The former is brought by thorough collaboration with cultural barriers, while the latter is generally brought about by commodification and cultural appropriation with the advent of internet, tourism, technology, and modernity, among others. So what is it? What is controversial about Whang-ud and NAS Daily? So let's try to examine. With the ongoing debate on the controversy, let us examine the matter of facts and situate these laws that I mentioned earlier. In terms of content, NAS Daily claims that Online Academy will, I quote, share her culture for future generations to appreciate and respect the ancient tradition of Manbabato. For a fee of 750 pesos or $15, enrollers can watch tattooing lessons from Whang-ud herself. Here, the permanent skin marking known as batok is presented as an authentic Kalinga practice packaged for and experienced by the viewer as real, supposedly connecting it to Whang-ud and her remote village. Traditionally, batok is learned by observation. Learning it by clickable paid content devalues batok and the indigenous concept of devalues batok and the people who practice and the people who are identified with the practice. It also diminished the experience of embarking on a journey and getting the batok based on the community's notion of skin deep or naichayu. In terms of content, Nas daily claims that it secured a private permission from Whang-ud and her immediate family through a thumb mark. Grace Palikas, the Whang-ud's niece, complained about the lack of valid consent and the supportive rejoinder from the head of the Cacao Project, which broadened the issue of, I quote, neo-colonial appropriation. I also would like to focus on the requirement for FPIC as mandated by the IPRA law. The idea of consent should follow the NCCA's FPIC under the IPRA law in Section 2. Point G. It underscores FPIC that it should be secured first by means of consensus of all members of the ICCs or the IPs to be determined in accordance with the respective customary laws and practices, free from external manipulation, interference, and coercion, and obtained after fully disclosing the intent and scope of the activity in a language and process understandable to the community. If we are to spell out FPIC on the procedures for acquiring the FPIC, I noticeably maintained an open mind on the flogger's culpability in respect to Whang-ud, going so far only to say that it must be determined whether, despite observable errors such as thumb mark instead of a handwritten signature, which from my knowledge of Whang-ud would have been possible to attain, the vlogger could still be faulted in some way. Furthermore, there is also lack on the part of NAS Daily of properly and accurately translating the contents of the contract in the local language. Did the Batbut ethnic community get involved in the agreement between NAS Daily and Whang-ud? No, there was no tradition or there was no paranos that was held by the entire community. Paranos is a kind of community ritual where everybody's invited to partake for discussing the intents of for instance, the visitors or whoever wants to conduct research or documentary or produce a documentary in the village. In terms of ownership, the tus or batok in the Kalinga context is in fact a communal property. This is an intangible cultural heritage or ICH shared by the Kalinga people specifically and the Philippines in general. The tus as intangible cultural heritage are prompted under IPRA, Section 5 of the law, which mentions in general terms the indigenous concept of ownership. And notes that this body of indigenous knowledge systems and practices are fully owned by the indigenous peoples. So there, if you can see this one in Section 34, it stipulates the recognition of the full ownership and control and production of their cultural and intellectual property, intellectual rights. The book called The Cultural Life of Intellectual Properties by Rosemary Combe, and I quote, each nation or group is perceived as an author who originates a culture from resources that come from within and can thus lay claim to exclusive possession of the expressive works that embody its personality. So this means that this intangible cultural heritage is owned by the community and the nation itself, and thereby it should be protected. In relation to this, the But community also shared to me this contract that was allegedly signed by Whang-ud. And it states there in page 4 that all intellectual property rights in the course, including the course recordings and any materials for the purpose of the course, is owned by NAS Daily. So this to me is really grave, no, in terms of the recognition of this intellectual property right, and it should be owned, communally owned by the community itself. And the lack of communal copyright protection of traditional designs has seriously aggravated these tattoo practices. Tattoos also has become a commodity. So the consequences of translating knowledge of others for illiterate Western knowledge to learn traditional tattoos reflects the shift from process to a product of commodity. So here we can see culture as is an increasingly a price commodity, aggressively appropriated by other entities. So when rights are taken away and these are translated to commercial values, then it becomes commodified. No? So while the FDIC provisions stipulate that it respects and protects the community from the commercialization of culture, there is no provision on the control of what outsiders, such as NAS Daily, do with the information or materials gathered from the community. A weak point in the FPIC process is the lack of specific policies on what to do when people come and leave the village. So what are the policies for respectful treatment regarding representation of indigenous cultures? What are the consequences when groups misrepresent culture? Instead, this question led me further to investigate, what is it that in IPRA that tells us that indigenous peoples and their cultures are protected? What are the specific rights of the indigenous peoples in relation to cultural heritage? Does IPRA or the intellectual property rights provide protection for traditional tattoos and the cultural bearers of the practice? What are the challenges in facing copyright protection on tattoos? Are tattoos copyrightable? There seems to be ambiguity when it comes to the protection of traditional tattoos as a tangible medium of expression among the indigenous groups in the Cordilleran region. Meantime, let us look at this RA 8371. No? So I highlighted the relevant provisions of this act, and you can see that they highlight that this should be respected, recognized, protected, etc. under the law. And there is also a section where there's a mention of community intellectual rights by the ICCs. And again, it seems that they are just reiterating that it should be protected. In RA 8293, there's a phrase there that says that it shall protect and secure the exclusive rights of scientists, inventors, artists, and other gifted citizens to their intellectual property and creations, particularly when beneficial to the people or for such periods as provided by this act. So intellectual property rights consist of copyright and related rights, trademarks and service marks, geographic indicators, which is important, where tattoos are only practiced in Kalinga, industrial designs, patents, layout designs, protection of undisclosed information. And then again, RA 10006, again, like I mentioned earlier, tattoos can be under the intangible cultural heritage or intangible cultural property of the state, which refers to the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as instruments, objects, and others under the law. So while we see this, there is only very the discussion or the iteration of this law is very generic, and it only mentions that it respects and protects these rights of the indigenous people. However, it is not clearly spelled out on how it is done. It also lacks policies on the consequences of misrepresentation of indigenous cultures by other entities. Sure, there is FPIC, but it does not protect further. And I think most of this cultural property law is unequipped at all. So does IPRA or the IPR provide protection for these traditional tattoos? Are traditional tattoos copyrightable? To date, there are no cases of copyrightability of tattoos that had gone on court or filed a lawsuit, but more on the issues of free prior informed consent, cultural appropriation, and exploitation. Under the IPO, copyrightable works are expressed in various forms, from buildings, computer programs, film, electronically produced images, music, performance art, literary works, among others. However, as traditional tattoos as tangible expressions of culture or intangible culture heritage is silent in the law. The work of tattoo practitioners is just entitled to copyright protection similar to other forms of art, yet traditional tattoo practitioners may not be aware of this or may be further dissuaded from enforcing their copyrights due to the lack of recognition of tattoos as copyrightable subject. Whang-ud and some 25 young tattoo practitioners have not viewed themselves as part of the intellectual property community. Tattoos appear to meet the requisites of copyright protection. They are original and are fixed in a tangible medium of expression. The tattoo and the design itself can be copyrighted and entirely consistent with the copyright law. In the IPO copyright, it has been extended to protect a multiplicity of media and new technologies as they develop. But the copyrightability of tattoos is still in question. With this, there are issues and concerns that arise when leaving this area of law unresolved. A failure to protect the traditional tattoos and at the same time the loss of control over collective ownership of traditional tattoos is lost. Although tattoos are unconventional under the traditional understanding of copyright law, there is no support in the text of RA 8283 and RA 8371 to protect traditional tattoos, even if they are copyrightable subject matter. Over the years, we have seen how traditional tattoos and Whang-ud as a brand may have been commodified. In the case of batok or tattoos, for instance, there is simply a lot of commodification when individuals market the restless search for novelty to transform unfamiliar tattoo patterns into exploitable commercial resources. So to conclude, I would see that there should be the local people should own their own culture. Commodification of tattoos is understood to pose the threat of cultural dissolution. The tattoo artist's skill, complexity of the designs can impact the ownership interest in a copyrightable tattoo design. And more importantly, there should be a review of policies that govern the IP rights, most especially on cultural heritage. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. Maraming salamat po, Dr. Ikin Amores. Um, yes, and it's really a very recent topic actually, which tends to put particular notion and instance on how lacking Philippine governmental laws are concerning patent and whatnot, and copyright laws as far as indigenous property rights are concerned. Now, I do believe the audience has a lot of questions concerning that since, well, due to the fact that it's a very recent topic at hand. No? But may I remind the audience to please type in your questions at our chat box. Don't forget to state your name and where you're coming from, your institution, and we will address this immediately after our final speaker has delivered their lecture. Now, let us move on to our next topic. Sir FERNAN TALAMAYAN and his lecture entitled Commodifying Cultures, Negotiating Identities, the Reproduction of and Performance of the Cordilleran Cultural Heritage in Tam-awan Village. Ready ka na ba, Sir FERNAN?
Ready na.
Okay. Palakpakan po natin, virtual palakpak na lang po para sa susunod nating speaker. Okay. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Sure. Good afternoon. I am FERNAN TALAMAYAN, a PhD candidate at the Institute of Social Research and Cultural Studies, National Ming Chiao University, Taiwan. Before I begin, I first want to thank Professor Leia Baguio and the organizers of the CSS lecture series for giving me the opportunity to share the floor with highly respected Indigenous studies scholars and experts. If I may share, I was thrilled when I learned that Professor SALVADOR-AMORES will be here, and I'll be sharing the floor with her, especially since her book on tattooing identities greatly inspired my work on culture commodification. So, isa rin po malaking karangalan na kumarap muli sa mga mag-aaral ng UP. Sa mga kapwa ko, Isko at Iska, maraming salamat. So, today, I want to share my research on the commodification, negotiation, and performance of the Cordilleran culture and identity in a living museum like Tam-awan Village. For context, I conducted this research in 2016 and 2017 before I left the Philippines. It involved semi-structured individual and group interviews and ethnographic observations. The president of Chanung Foundation and one of the founders of Tam-awan Village, Jordan Mang-osan, granted me permission to conduct research in the museum and use the information I gathered for research purposes. If you find my work interesting or useful for your research, you may also read it in the forthcoming back-to-back issue of the Cordilleran Review, edited by Professor Oscar Campomanes. On that note, I want to start with a quote from Dominic, the Tam-awan Village in-house performing group leader back in 2017. And I quote, "Parang exhibit kami. Pero masaya naman kami sa ginagawa namin at na-showcase namin ang kultura namin. Masaya mag-perform, lalo na kapag mas maraming nanonood. At tingin namin ay nag-iiba ang tingin nila sa Igorot. Tingin nila, dati sa amin, may buntot, marumi." End of quote. Every day, oh no, not every day, every Saturday or during special occasions, Dominic's group regularly performs traditional Cordilleran dances in Tam-awan Village. To the unaware, though I'm also sure that you are, Tam-awan Village is a living museum that promotes community awareness by exhibiting indigenous Cordilleran art and traditions. As a living museum, it not only makes visitors experience sleeping in an authentic Cordilleran hut, but also give a picture of a typical Highlander village. It also provides avenues for visitors to participate in different creative activities or enjoy indigenous festivities and dances. Ultimately, by showcasing Cordilleran cultural heritage, the museum hopes that the indigenous will be respected, integrated into Philippine society. Tam-awan Village is also a haven for artists and enthusiasts, especially to those who promote indigenous culture. As an artist hub, the village provides a space for young and senior artists to learn from each other and share a common advocacy. Yet, these promotions of the Cordilleran culture unfold against a backdrop of commodification. The reproduction and performance of Cordilleran traditions in Baguio City rest upon longer practices of indigenous tourism and cultural commodification, with large-scale tourism exploiting the community's indigeneity for economic gain. It encouraged the preservation and promotion of the Cordilleran culture and identity. However, upholding indigenous symbols and traditions through tourism demonstrates curious contradictions in heritage management. First, cultures and spaces in such contexts are not necessarily preserved, but instead negotiated and transformed. Quoting George and Reed, 2005, the commodification of culture results in the death of a tradition and the birth of a new culture based on traditional icons. Second, while preserving and promoting indigenous beliefs and practices, these practices, when they are promoted, advance social inclusion and cultural awareness. The said practices also objectify and exclude those they intend to empower. This phenomenon is especially true in places with a long history of exoticization and marginalization of indigenous populations. In this light, I examined the negotiation of culture and identity in indigenous tourism. I analyzed the interconnected nature of colonization, exoticization, commodification, and marginalization to determine the factors that influence the process of negotiation. I gave particular attention to the influences of historical junctions on Cordilleran culture and identity to show the pushes and pull that led to the emergence of the Cordilleran that tourists commonly see and experience. To this end, I asked the following questions. First, how do colonial legacies affect the alteration of local spaces and practices in the context of tourism? Second, what factors shape the notion and projection of the Cordilleran, and how do these impact the negotiation and performance of the Cordilleran identity? So this presentation is divided into 4 parts. The first part paints in broad strokes the discourse of the Living Museum and indigenous tourism, which guides my examination of my field site, Tam-awan village. The second part unpacks the collective name Cordilleran and briefly narrates the group's experience under US colonial rule in the earlier half of the 20th century. Providing details about Tam-awan village, the third part explains the paradox of culture preservation and production. The final part, meanwhile, establishes the connection between the previous parts. It locates the intersection of colonial legacies, the practice of culture and identity, and indigenous tourism, and it explains how the country's colonial past continues to influence the commodification, negotiation, and performance of indigenous culture and identity in the operation of Cordillera tourism. Now we jump to the first part. The notion of the Living Museum is commonly associated with the Living History and Living History Museum, defined by J. Anderson in 1982 as an attempt to simulate life in another time. Space and human experience connect museums to histories, with living museums acting as sites where history and culture, both tangible and intangible, are interpreted, expressed, and relived. These activities intend to reproduce and perform both past and everyday life. They are often theatrical, employing creative and symbolic forms such as drama, ritual, pageantry, and play. For these reasons, authenticity has been the dominant preoccupation of the earlier works that problematize the said terms. Previous literature regarded authenticity as a perfect simulation, quoting Handler and Saxton, 1988. It is an isomorphism between a living history, activity, or event, and that piece of the past it is meant to recreate. End of quote. Others noted the impossibility of accurate historic reproduction, emphasizing the different meanings of authenticity found in the discourse of authority, representations, expectations, and negotiations. David Lowenthal's research, meanwhile, discussed people's fascination with retrieving and reliving the past, an obsession motivated, at least in part, by nostalgia and profit. Later works examined living museums in the context of tourism, post-coloniality, and capitalism, veering away from the issues of authenticity and the museum goer's experience. Zeroing in on indigenous people's circumstances, Chris Ryan and Michelle Aiken discussed in 2005 how a population that has been socially marginalized and economically dislodged by colonialism promoted their cultural heritage through indigenous tourism. Their work emphasized the significance of culture commodification to the indigenous group's survival in the modern capitalist system. Sylvia Kleinert tackled indigenous tourism in a similar vein. Assimilation through tourism, she argued, became the means for Aboriginal Australian culture survival, and she explained how their tourism signified the, quote, encounter with the primitive other and the keeping up the culture for the Aborigines. A common thread that these works sought to explore was the survival of the marginalized culture, hence the focus on the indigenous people's recognition, representation, and assimilation in modern society. Their framework serves as an anchor to my analysis of tourism practices in Tam-awan village. Highlighting such a shift in the field of living history museums does not necessarily mean that the authenticity issues absolutely disappeared. Authenticity would reappear in Ruth Ellen Gruber's 2009 book, Beyond Virtually Jewish, New Authenticities in Real Imaginary Spaces in Europe. Here, Gruber proposed a notion of quote-unquote new authenticity. It is which she describes as an outcome of cultural transformations in spaces that simulate an imagined past environment. According to Gruber, new authenticities are real experiences modeled after a reality they attempt to evoke. In other words, in recreating the past, a new set of stereotypes, behavior, and traditions are created. This approach settles the concerns surrounding authenticity, for it implies that any reconstruction in its own right is authentic. Yet, to go beyond the issues of authenticity and cultural and economic survival, I navigated through the connections between the living museum and indigenous tourism and underscored the roles of history and politics in their formation and operation. Whereas the performance of culture and negotiation of identity in such spaces are influenced by the desire to preserve and promote the culture and the need to survive and adapt to modern capitalist system, I posited that living museums in indigenous tourism in general are shaped and are continuously shaping the tradition of cultural commodification and ethnic marginalization. So this brings us to our next concern. How does our colonial history shape indigenous tourism and indigenous identities? First, let's briefly talk about the term Cordilleran. Cordilleran is a collective name for all people belonging to different ethnic groups in the Cordilleran administrative region. Outsiders among the Cordillerans, particularly the Western colonizers, coined the term Cordilleran, as well as other names such as Igoyotes or Igorots, which they used to pertain to those who live in the mountains or highlands. Following the country's long history of exoticism and Orientalism under Western colonial rule, the term carried with it several stereotypes such as being primitive, quote unquote, backward, unhygienic, barbaric, and savage. Curiously though, the term Cordilleran continues to carry with it the colonial stereotypes among Filipinos decades after the granting of Philippine independence. The Philippines' colonial past shaped the general perception of Cordilleran culture and identity. In the early 1900s, the US colonial government juxtaposed the modern and superior Western civilization, with what they perceived as the primitive and inferior Filipino culture. What followed was the creation of an othered image of the indigenous population. As the script of US colonialism revolved around the ideas of American greatness, superiority, and benevolence, the projected backwardness of the so-called other justified the necessity to colonize, quoting Vergara 1995. The Americans took it upon themselves to guide Filipinos to civilization by changing their perceived backward norms and lifestyles. So this is the narrative of the American colonial government when they came to the Philippines. to colonize the Philippines. So this political and cultural othering involved the exoticization of the Filipinos, especially the Cordillerans. Carbonell in 2000 defined exoticism as the displacement or the strangeness enacted by the difference that stands as a representation for the whole. Photography in the early 1900s, as Vergara 1995 wrote, for example, stereotype Filipinos as the quote-unquote exotic unknown. Another commonly cited example that tells about the production of such stereotypes is the exhibition of the Cordillerans in the St. Louis World Fair in Missouri in 1904. The Cordillerans, who in the exhibit were spectacularized and described as the dog-eating Igorots, performed rituals and other aspects of their culture for the exhibition. Although these examples of exoticization and othering of the indigenous peoples happened at the time when the fascination for expeditions to discover the exotic unknown was the trend, the thirst for the exotic unknown persisted a century hence. Only this time, it is indigenous tourism and living museums that allow for the fulfillment of these fantasies. Drawing the bigger picture, Leeper in 1990 proposed that tourist demands are generated and supplied by a tourist system, with indigenous tourism stimulating demand for the exotic unknown. Living museums act as receiving locations or the supply and meet the demand by creating familiarity with the unfamiliar. Despite a sense of continuity, during my research, I found that the continuation and exoticization in living museums does not necessarily replicate imperialist messages. Living museums may use the same images and artifacts used by colonial governments for their propaganda, but many of them, like the Tam-awan village, reappropriate colonial signifiers to empower the marginalized. And by becoming embedded in a different discourse, and with artists' stroke of creativity, colonial images can serve a different purpose. Let's now move on to my field site, Tam-awan Village. The Tam-awan Village was established in 1998 through the leadership of Chanum Foundation's Cheat Asignacion, national artist Ben Cab, Jordan Mangosan, attorney Nestor Mondok, Ann Camdas Michael, and Jackson Bryan III. While there's much to share about the museum, I understand that most of us here, if not all, are aware of Tam-awan. Hence, I will no longer describe the museum. I actually think that many of you have visited this museum, so I need not discuss the details about what you can see inside or what you experience when you go on a weekend. So just allow me to jump to people who help make the museum alive. As I mentioned, the Tam-awan Village in-house performing group performs Cordilleran rituals and dances every Saturday or during special occasions. They usually do 3 to 4 dances each time a crowd gathers near the museum's Ugnayan Gallery. They usually perform Kalinga's Sakpaya, Ifugao's Dinuya, Tinggian's Tadek, and Mountain Province Balangbang. Sakpaya is a Thanksgiving dance that mimics Sakpaya birds that fly over the rice terraces. Dinuya, meanwhile, is a ceremonial and festival dance performed during planting or harvest seasons or significant life events such as weddings, birth, funerals, and burials. Tadek or Tadek in Laud is a courtship dance that uses a salukisit, an upturned handheld bronze gong hit with a stick as its main instrument, musical instrument. Lastly, a ritual dance that reenacts a tribal war, Balangbang, is performed during marriage ceremonies and before planting and harvesting seasons. It is in these performances of Balangbang that the audience members are invited to participate in dance. The male gong players move in a circular direction as each participant synchronizes their steps with other dancers. Female dancers follow the male leader, but if the females have their female leader, they are expected to follow the female one. After the dance, the performers would welcome the tourists to have pictures with them. So many tourists who I managed to interview who visited the village. Their reasons for visiting vary. So some say that they wanted to satisfy their thirst for adventure. Some are in search of the quote-unquote contrast from the modern and quote authentic Cordilleran culture. Some went to the village thinking that the place was hip and cool. Those who did their research before visiting the village said that they came to witness Cordilleran rituals and dances. So a more obvious effect of commodification on cultural heritage is the transformation of the purpose and meanings of several symbols and material culture. For example, the repurposing of traditional huts or production and purchase of keychains and refrigerator magnets that reappropriate sacred icons. While the symbols and images refer to or hint at their source cultures, the utility and significance of the material culture were changed during commodification and consumption. However, to make the connections between colonial legacies, culture commodification, and living museums apparent, I focus more on Cordilleran's negotiation of their identity and the sense of empowerment that prevails in Tam-awan village. So here I defined identity as both personal and social. Following FERNAN 1999, it is an individual source of self-respect and dignity in reference to a social category. And following Goffman, it is also performative. Considering the lasting impact of colonialism on indigenous peoples' identities, museums such as the Tam-awan village could function as one of the common sites where the colonized could break free from a colonial past and celebrate their indigeneity. Indeed, as the Chamnam Foundation clearly stated on Tam-awan village website, the museum intended to, and I quote, promote community awareness on the intergenerational responsibility of the people to preserve and conserve our patrimony, the environment, and our cultural heritage, promote awareness in respect, and sustain various indigenous customs, cultural heritage, and the arts in the Philippines, particularly the Cordillera, and use the foundation as a catalyst in promoting awareness, respect, and pride on our customs, traditional, and cultural heritage, end of quote. So in Tam-awan village, the promotion of deeper understanding, respect, and pride in the cultural heritage of the Cordillera people happens through its exhibition of what has been historically othered. Although it appears self-defeating to reproduce colonial signifiers, some Cordillerans perceive the exoticization of their identity as an opportunity to reverse the negative impact of colonialism. During my field research, I observed that the curiosity about Cordilleran performers' otherness consistently drew a crowd inside the museum. People approach or stop at the Ugnayan Gallery when cultural performers play the gongs. I also found that this curiosity about the other even motivated some tourists to visit Tam-awan village. As demands for the exotic and unfamiliar create opportunities for an encounter, encounters, on the other hand, provide a platform for the exoticized and marginalized to dismantle crystallized subjectivities and promote their culture, identity, and welfare. To understand how the described paradox works and how the setup benefits the indigenous peoples, it is important to first look at how identities are negotiated in such environments. According to Tim Winter in 2012, identity is negotiated with the identities ascribed by others to it across time. Following this definition, the colonial legacy's continuation in the presentation and performance of cultural heritage may be understood in the context of the indigenous people's negotiation of their identity with the one ascribed to them by their audience. The negotiation of identity happens when individuals are in the intermediate presence of others, especially when it is beneficial for them to convey a desirable image. In such instances, the indigenous peoples who perform rituals and dances in museums must project an image that meets the expectations of the tourists, because when expectations and perspectives are not of authentic indigenous culture and identity are not met, tourists become unconvinced of authenticity of performances that they witness. Since indigenous tourism is motivated not only by the promotion of culture, but also by profit, indigenous identity is negotiated in cultural performances to be convincing and sellable. The Tam-awan village in-house performing groups live exhibition of their ritual and dance in the museum manifest such negotiation. In negotiating their tradition and identity, hour-long rituals are reduced to a few minutes to introduce a variety of dances to their audiences. The community dance balangbang, for instance, traditionally lasts for several minutes for as long as the gong players play music, making it a perfect dance for mass participation since anyone can join or exit the performance anytime. In the exhibition, however, in Tam-awan village, it is reduced to just almost 2 minutes. Meanwhile, indigeneity is performed by wearing traditional clothes that they do not normally wear outside the museum. At the very least, the cultural performers use past gestures and symbols helps meet what the people expect as authentic. Capitalizing on their otherness, the cultural performers are able to connect with their audience as they satisfy the audience curiosity about the exotic and unfamiliar. Once expectations of authentic indigenous culture are met, members of the crowd express their appreciation by applauding the performance, taking pictures with the performers, as you can see on your screen, or even donating money to the group. They have this, they call it mahiwagang box, mahiwagang kahon. But beyond these manifestations of satisfaction, for the performers, the connection they made with the audience is deemed most crucial. A meaningful encounter allows them to introduce their culture and decolonize their image simultaneously. Bea, one of the viewers I interviewed back in 2017, shared that the encounter with the cultural performers not only made her appreciate Cordilleran's otherness, but also gave her a sense of national pride. In her words, it made her feel proud about being a Filipino. Sabi niya, nakaka-proud. This statement tells us that through such acts, the image of otherness may transcend its colonial meanings and become a source of a collective spirit and even national pride. Apart from the described transformative function, such performances reflect the continuous transformation of cultures and identities. Indigenous tourism detaches rituals from their original context, like courtship, weddings, Thanksgiving, funerals, and seamlessly attaches them to the museum's discourse. In the process of recontextualization, specific elements particular to the ritual source are consciously maintained to manifest the ritual's Cordilleranness, if I may say. But while rituals' meanings change, their celebratory nature remains. Only this time, they no longer celebrate significant life events, but their culture and identity. Noting the birth of culture in a living museum, another outcome of the negotiation of identity and commodification of culture is the fusion of performances, icons, and deities of various ethnic groups into a single entity, the Cordilleran. Even though the Tam-awan village in-house performing group mentions the source cultures of the dances they perform, I gathered from various interviews with museum goers that all performances are perceived either Cordilleran or Igorot. While it appears paradoxical in terms of helping the indigenous population promote and preserve their cultures and identities, emphasis on the S, Dominic, the leader of the cultural performers, explains that, and I quote, malaki ang tulong ng Tam-awan village dahil yung parang diverse na community namin sa magkakalayong lugar, parang pinag-iisa dito. Parang naging neutral reserve na rin siya, naging neutral reserve na rin yung lugar dito. Parang lahat na experience pa rin yung buhay noon. Talagang yung trend dito, yung parang buhay dati talaga, nakakadagdag ng knowledge. End of quote. It can be understood from Dominic that the merging of cultures is a non-issue, especially to those who perform their culture for tourism and commodification. Further, cultural performances in a living museum transform traditional rituals and dances into an alternative form of entertainment. However, as Ryan in 2005 posited, there is a danger in perceiving cultural performances as entertainment. He warned that those who perform a culture, when perceived as entertainers, become captives of the impresarios. Contrarily, the cultural performers in Tam-awan village express no animosity on how the museum exhibits them. Learning from the performers, The museum provides a space for the indigenous peoples to not only reintroduce their culture to others, but also enshrine their Cordilleran identity. Performers recognize that they are like exhibits, and quote unquote, but as culture bearers, they appreciate the chance to influence people's perspectives about them. These statements echo the shift in viewing indigenous tourism, that it no longer creates stereotypes of the marginalized, but rather provides first a means by which those people aspire to economic and political power for self-advancement, and second, a place of dialogue between and within differing worldviews. So these experiences create contradicting perceptions on performances of culture and identity in a living museum. On the one hand, the spectacularization, which creates new traditions based on older traditions, reproduces colonial signifiers to elicit an experience that matches tourist expectation. On the other hand, the performances also provide a source of joy and pride, or even empowerment to those who embody an imagined Cordilleran past. That said, the celebration of Cordilleran cultural heritage in Tam-awan village is at the same time objectifying and empowering. The environment stimulates objectification, and yet it makes the unseen seen. The phenomenon results in the emergence of a peculiar Cordilleran culture in the living museum. Summing up, traditionally, museums are created to display a collection of things, capture and portray certain events, or convey messages to a group of people. It could exhibit the people's way of living, as well as collect, preserve, or interpret both their material culture and non-material culture. In producing a narrative from these collections, museums decide whose and which artworks, sculptures, rituals, songs, or dances it will include. As such, it naturally produces boundaries and borders by silencing or creating an other. Historically, museums have also played a vital role in creating racial hierarchies, like in the case of colonial exhibitions, or normalizing, borrowing the words of Hobsbawm Ranger, invented traditions to promote the so-called superiority of a particular population. But in recent years, the creation of living museums opened up opportunities for the reclamation of self-respect and dignity to those who have been historically marginalized. An example of such is the Tam-awan village. While people are drawn to such museums through sheer curiosity of the exotic and the unfamiliar, the resulting encounter with indigenous helps promote indigenous culture and welfare. However, to make every encounter productive, culture bearers willingly perform their identity. Their performance involves negotiating their identity, hence reconfiguring their older traditions and creating new rituals and artifacts based on past symbols and icons. By incorporating Cordilleran elements familiar to the audience, the performance of their negotiated culture becomes convincing. Although Tam-awan village objectifies those it exhibits, this objectification did not prevent the museum from empowering and capacitating some members of the indigenous communities in the Philippines. As the museum encourages modifications of rituals and dances, it makes the formerly invisible visible. Also, apart from promoting indigenous culture, the museum provides livelihood to the least privileged members of these minority groups. Hence, my work's emphasis on a paradoxical phenomenon, that is, the creation and reproduction of a negotiated culture and identity based on older traditions, colonial images, and cultural upliftment. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Sir Fernan. Isang virtual na palakpak dyan para sa ating presenter. Ayan. Thank you for showing us certain issues that Tam-awan actually has at present, specifically with rituality and its transitions towards cultural education and issues towards authenticity and presentation. Napakaraming tanong pong pwede natin magawa ukol dyan. But needless to say, may also imply that the Tam-awan is not only a hub dedicated for catering to touristic presentations. Also, believe it or not, the Tam-awan village is also a hub for so many performing Igorot groups not only within Baguio City, but all over the Cordillera. Like we have groups from Ifugao, they make it a point to visit the Tam-awan whenever they're here. And it creates this notion of discourse, of either critiquing, correction, of acknowledgement, etc., etc. Ayan, maraming salamat po, Sir Fernan. Now let's move on to our last lecture for this afternoon, Dr. Edwin V. Antonio and his presentation on fostering cross-cultural understanding through the case of Katutubo exchange. Dr. Edwin Antonio, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready, sir?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Dean Abayaw, to the faculty and staff, special mention to Sir Ayo, our moderator, and of course, Sir Matthew, and also the students of UP Baguio, and to my to all the participants of this webinar IPRA at napiyangagaw, naimbangal daw kada kayo amin na po, and of course magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. And of course, it's an honor to be part of this webinar. And thank you so much for this opportunity to share. And of course, isang mainit na pagbati ng makadayaw at isang maligayang pambansang buwan ng mga katutubong Filipino. Of course, this is pursuant to Proclamation number 1906, signed in 2009. Of course, this is to give due recognition to the indigenous peoples and of course the indigenous people's rights. And of course, ang 2021 din po ay declared as the year of the Filipino pre-colonial ancestors at according to the Presidential Proclamation number 1128 signed in 2021, isang pagbibigay pugay no sa ating mga ninuno na nakipaglaban no sa ating mga karapatan no. Of course, this is to give due recognition to our origin and our identity. And of course, this is my presentation about cultural rights and of course, fostering cross-cultural understanding through the case of Katutubo exchange. Actually, magkukwento ako ng marami dito. Okay, talakayin muna natin kung ano yung cultural rights. No? These are basically the rights related to arts and culture, no? Both understood in a large sense. The objective of these rights is to guarantee that people and communities have an access to culture and can participate in the culture of their selection. And these are human rights that aim at assuring the enjoyment of culture and its components in conditions of equality, human dignity, and non-discrimination. They are rights related to themes such as language, no, that discussed yesterday, no, with the episode yesterday, the first one, and of course, cultural and artistic production, participation in cultural life, and of course, cultural heritage and intellectual property rights, authors' rights, minorities and access to culture, among others. So, these cultural rights emanated from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No? It's based on Article 27. No? Everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Everyone has the right to the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary, or artistic production of which he is the author. Actually, natalaka ito kahapon no, about sa authorship, no, if it's the author or the researcher with the community as author of the study, and of course ano ba yung tangible benefits na makukuha nila out from these research works and research studies. Yan ang cultural right, and of course I'd like to include here Article 7, no? All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Yeah, we will try to answer these questions now after my presentation. How are cultural rights recognized across different ethno-linguistic groups? And how do different ethno-linguistic groups recognize cultural practices of others? And of course, how do we ensure that in the presentation of these different cultures that their ownership of said practices are recognized? Okay, I'd like to introduce my group. Katutubo Exchange Philippines is also called KXPH. It's a volunteer culture organization composed of indigenous youth and cultural workers that advocates the promotion of indigenous cultural heritage and cross-cultural understanding. We started the program way back in 2013 with this logo and of course slogan, bridging cultures and building future. And we have these various programs that we implement. Ito nga sinasabi natin na Katutubo Exchange. This is an annual program. It's an annual cultural exchange program that we invite indigenous youth guided by their adult leader. And of course, we also have community outreach programs. We go and visit indigenous communities, of course, academic institutions or communities, even overseas Pinoy communities. We reach out to them. Meron tayong international outreach program. And of course, we have this Centro Katutubo na gusto namin sana madagdagan kasi we have one here in Ilocos, and then we have a museum here, and then of course arts camp every summer period, and then of course we have the Katutubo residency program na ini-invite namin tapos during summer, and then they conduct some workshops for the other children or the other youth here. And of course School of Living Traditions or folk school, and we have webinars and online events such as like this, other cultural programs then. And I think I'm happy to share this project with you, yung specialty or folk school on Surat Mangyan. We have this alumna na siya pa lang, I think the one who knows the script, Kaya I asked her to start this project. I think we started way back in 2019. We implemented this for 6 months, and every weekend they go to the tribal hall kasi doon ang venue, and the community was so happy to learn again or their script, their Surat Mangyan. And the elders as well as the young children or the youth were together in one class. Talagang I can see, I can feel the happiness in them kasi yun ang gusto nila na mapag-aralan din nila, yung intangible cultural heritage nila na nawala na. It's good that we have this alumni in our group na pinagsikapan niya na gawin. And of course, we had some materials that we use kasi they need some paper. So I go there I think every twice a month, and I provide materials papers and of course markers and of course some t-shirts to write on yung script nila. And of course they have this traditional luka and they write their poems or ambahan on that bamboo tube, And there was also one Japanese, who saw our post on the Facebook, and she asked me if she can join the training. Of course, yeah, why not? And then she was able to come to the program, and then masaya yung community because they saw that some other people are interested to learn their culture, kaya naging interesado ang karamihan. Of course, the Council of Elders or most of the elders are happy to see this kind of project. And of course, we also continued this project on Palawan, sa Surat Tagbanwa naman to the Tagbanwa people, pero it was cut short because of the pandemic. And we hope to continue that. And of course, we also have folk school in Baybayin. This is an online program. And we want also to share yung training on inabel weaving or the textile weaving kasi most of our young people now are too preoccupied with their techie gadgets na. So we invited some at first, mga around 15. And they were able to finish yung program. And then the next one was a combination of students, teachers, and homemakers were there. And we started from picking the harvesting the cotton, from the farm up to the weaving. Okay, these are some, and of course we also advocate the use of indigenous colors, no? And we were able to bring the Aita children or the Aita youth at the International Dance Day sa Aliw Theater for an International Dance Day. It was the first time, no, that they had indigenous group dancing side by side with the big dance companies, and that was with Lisa Makuha. And they were also happy to see our indigenous groups, no, indigenous Aita youth group, no. And of course, we have this Katutubo residency where we invite youth to come over, and we go and visit other indigenous communities, and also to the academic institutions, to also conduct lectures and workshops. And we have this arts camp also, calligraphy, writing, of course, and this one dance programs. And also we reach out, yun sa mga indigenous groups abroad. No? We were able to get in touch with Orang Asli of Malaysia, and of course Native American, and of course Papuans. And through our programs also, we were able to invite Ibaloys to come with us in China. We were able to share to the Pinoy communities, some lectures for them and workshops, dance workshops at the embassy. And of course, the Chinese, actually the local Chinese youth are very happy to learn, and they can also speak Filipino language. And also we were able to bring our indigenous youth member to Indonesia. Then he was able to conduct workshop on wearing the isnag or yapayaw attire and dances, and also at the same time he was also able to learn the traditional dances of Bitawe cultural village in Indonesia. And of course Tiboli of South Cotabato and Sarangani, we were together in Singapore to do a lecture for local Singaporean youth as well as to the Pinoy communities in the embassy. And also some guestings on television. Ibaloy and the Tiboli, we were able to bring them there. And we had the very first one, Katutubo Exchange, the very first gathering, and we had it in Manila. And of course, performances in the different institutions like this in GSIS Museum, the Ibatan of Batanes and Aita, we were together. Okay, and Manobo. And of course, we also visit other institutions. No, we want to provide them opportunities to learn other cultures also. No, they were able to learn origami at the Japan embassy, and of course, wearing of yukata. And of course, they have a homestay. No, they have host families, and that was the first one. The second one was again in Manila. I think we're a growing delegation because maraming sumama pa rin, no? As young as 9-10 years old, kasama na po sa programa. And of course, we visited Indonesian embassy, a cultural experience of the Indonesian culture. And of course, ito yung minsan hindi natin nararating. Ito yung Malacanang Palace. They were able to see that. And of course, Tiboli of South Cotabato and Ibaloy of Benguet were with the group, as well as the Mamano of Surigao and Ifugao. Okay, and I think that's the only time that they were able to get to see and experience the other IP groups' culture, no? Because in a community, they just revolve around one community, one ethnic group, one ethno-linguistic group. So I think this is a good a program for them, no? And Kalinga and Yapayao, Kankanay, and they were able to visit, of course, the Resort Park, and they also had some interactions with celebrities, no? And they were featured in the dailies, and of course in 2015, no, still in Manila, these young kids or they are now actually grown up, and then if they see these pictures, no, actually natutuwa sila, no, kasi at that time, no, parang late nila, pero they were already part of the program. These are Mansaka of Davao del Norte and Panay Bukidnon of Iloilo. Yan. And then Tingyan of Abra at kasama ang Blaan of Sarangani. If you see the picture, no, Blaan of Sarangani, this was the first time, no, na nakipag-interact sila, no, first day nila, no. At first mahiyain sila, but later on maingay na masyado, no. I think I can see, no, the impact of the program to them, no, kasi they are being empowered. So at first nahiya, pero slowly na-develop yung self-esteem, and nabubusong moral nila through this program, kasi they can see also the other children, the other youth to perform and to interact with other youth. And we also expose them to other art forms, no, aside from their traditional arts, no, the traditional culture. We also have, no, yung ballet workshop, no, sa Ballet Manila, and of course we started the ballet baybayin writing workshop naman sa National Museum, and mabilis sila matuto. And of course culinary workshop also, no, to one of culinary school in Manila, and this was the first ride nila sa MRT sa Manila. And they were able to also see interact with our politicians, and of course the DFA, because we believe that if we provide them opportunities, who knows, they can also be future ambassadors or diplomats of our country. Okay, this was after 3 years, straight years in Manila, we moved to Sarangani, Mindanao in 2016. Okay. At first, I had a difficulty of inviting, because they were scared. Actually, that's Mindanao. But when they experienced Maitom Sarangani, and they were surprised na most of the people there speak Ilocano. Okay, so most of my Cordilleran delegates were happy to interact with the local people there. Even Tiboli speak Ilocano, even the Maguindanaoans are speaking Ilocano. And of course, we had a grand time there, because it's like a vacation for them, no? It's just a gathering, and of course, we have a homestay. And minsan nga nangungulit yung iba na sumama pa sa next trips, no? We also know yung protection of the environment, no? It's part of our training for our youth then, no? We went to a sanctuary, Pawikan Sanctuary, and they released the turtles, no, to the Celebes Sea, and then we had some swimming. So, and of course, aside from the enjoyment, of course, meron din silang obligasyon to engage in the IP conference, no? As young as they are, no, they were part of that conference with the tribal leaders of the Sarangani, of specifically Maitum. And natutuwa yung mga elders, kasi coming from that was their first time also to see Cordillerans, as well as other groups like Mangyan o Mindoro, no? Natutuwa sila na first time nila makita, and according to them, nakikita lang nila sila sa libro, and of course the internet. And we were part of this big festival in that town. And dati-dati kasi mga artista ang in-invite, so itong ating mga delegation ang na-invite dun sa program na yan. And we moved to Visayas naman, and that was in 2017, no, in Iloilo. This was touching base with our heritage sites, no, yung built heritage structures natin, and that was in Miagao, and of course mall show at the Robinsons, no. And we had also courtesy calls to the local leaders, no, of course visit to the academic institutions, and of course interaction with our very own national living treasure, Federico Caballero of Panay Bukidnon tribe. And na-inspired din sila, because uh, ang traditional form kasi ni Federico Caballero is chanting, no, epic chanting. So maganda ang response ng mga bata, and they were so happy about the experience. And again, in 2017, we had it in Ilocos Sur and Ilocos Norte. Again, na-visit nila yung mga heritage sites. No? I think even yun sa Ilocos Sur, no? Sa heritage city of Vigan, was part of our tour. No? And this was riding the Kalesa. It was their first time to ride the Kalesa. And did you know that we gave them each ethno-linguistic group delegate has its own Kalesa, and we paraded around the city. And I think the drivers, tricycle drivers, have seen, have read what's that? Yakan of Basilan. When they saw and read the Yakan of Basilan, the drivers were shouting, Abu Sayyaf, Abu Sayyaf. And then here comes another delegation, Magindanawan or Maguindanao. And then the tricycle drivers were shouting, Ampatuan, Ampatuan. So ito po yung mga nakalungkot na pangyayari na it should not happen kasi I don't know, kasi we need to do something else para at least ma-educate yung public regarding sa treatment nila sa mga different ethno-linguistic groups, no? Kasi kung ano yung naririnig nila from the media, siguro yun lang yung napipick up nila. So I think ito yung purpose din namin to educate the public, no? Kung sino-sino yung mga different ethno-linguistic groups of the country. And this was some performances also to the different institutions. And of course, we had also a visit to the National Living Treasure, Magdalena Gamayo, for Inabel weaving. And some of our delegates were already weaver. No? Itong on the picture is Gatdang from Margarita from Gatdang tribe. No? But all of them were able to experience weaving in the loom. And of course, this was interaction with Tingyan of Ilocos Norte, the young girl there, I think 9 years old, and tinuruan niya yung mga Tingyan youth. And of course, in this picture, they were able to share their indigenous attire. No? Yung mga, I think they had swapping and just to experience the clothing of each indigenous groups. And of course, the visit to the Vigan city, and it was such fun. No? First time nila lahat to visit the place, but there was an incident that happened here. No? Bumaba ang delegation from the van, and of course, nakita ng isang police, no? At pinagsabihan yung batang delegate ko, wearing the bahag syempre, at sinabihan siya na bawal yan dito magsuot ng ganyan. It was really disappointing to know a police officer at that telling a young boy to so these are some of the experience that I need to share it with you, because it's really happening at this point in time, no, with the advent of modern technology. I thought they are equipped, no, with the knowledge of the information kung sino yung mga ating mga kapatid na mga katutubo, pero it's not happening, no? Parang mali pa. So yun siguro. I think I've shared that to the media and the local media, and they apologized for that. Pero I did not have the chance to confront the officer. And of course, we headed to Maguindanao in 2019. In 2019, this is in Mindanao, of course. Yung pa rin, no? Issue is parang medyo delikado, but it was really peaceful. We are so blessed that we have some partners, no, on the area na very willing, no, na sumuporta sa programa, and we successfully conducted the program there. And ang mga kabataan, no, in the schools, kasi we had some visit to schools, no, ayan, natutuwa sila because they have seen this young Katutubos, especially Cordillera, kasi sabi nga nila may buntot, no. Yun ang yun ang akala nila, no? Pero when they saw them, no, parang na ano sila, na masaya sila, natuwa sila kasi sabi nila they just saw them on the books and online on the internet. Pero now in person, they were actually interacting with them. So it's a good interaction between the Maguindanaoans and the Cordillerans. No? Of course, also with the Mangyan. And this was a meeting with the Tiduray of Maguindanao, and we went there to their place. At siyempre, we experienced firsthand yung kanilang very hospitable treatment for us, no? Ang galing, and of course we started teaching each other, no? The Cordilleran teach the Tiduray dancing. I think tayo, I don't know, but the different dances of Baloy, and of course yung Tiduray din ganun din ang ginawa, and of course sharing also, no, the symbolism of the attires, no, by the gatdang there, and to the Tiduray, and of course visiting the masjid also, Grand Mosque. And because of the pandemic, we were not able to gather in person, no, so we just had it online, and this was last year, 2020. So many groups had joined us, and of course it's happening right here right now, no, the month of October. We will have the last episode on October 30 on our page. Of course, this is we made it into an international Katutubo exchange because we invited some IP groups from Thailand and from Indonesia and Malaysia, also Peru, Quechua of Peru. So these are Aita, and of course this one is Bukalot of Nueva Vizcaya, Isnag of Apayao, and if I can invite the public to watch us on Saturday. But before that, no, during last year, no, because it's the anniversary of the United Nations on the 75th year anniversary, we had also a global conversation with our youth, no, indigenous youth, together with their counterparts, no, from other countries. And itong mga bata natin, sabi na, Tatang, they call me Tatang kasi, and of course, siyempre sabi nila medyo, kinakabahan siya kasi they need to speak in English. Sabi ko, don't worry, just express yourself, kung ano yung gusto mong sabihin, pwede mong sabihin. Of course, ayun, nag-uusap kami in English para at least ma-practice sila, at tuwang-tuwa naman with the turnout of the global conversation. We discussed some issues about the youth, and of course, anong pwede nilang gawin to shape our future, no? And of course, last August 9 also we had another forum, international forum with other indigenous peoples of other countries. And this one is I'd like to show. Direct. Okay, that was in 2018 here in Ilocos Norte. But before that, no, we had also an incident that happened in Iloilo when we were there. There was a delegate of mine. The program ran smoothly, and I think we are about to end our program. And then the last day or the last night, they wanted to drop by in one of the malls. No, but this mall, actually, I asked them if they can accommodate us for maybe a mall show or an activity there in their mall, but they turned down my request because they were fully booked with activities. They were also bragging that they have a United Nations Day celebration. And ito po yung medyo concern ko because most of the people, my mga schools, they celebrate the United Nations Day, but they never did celebrate the Indigenous Peoples Month or Indigenous Peoples Day. And of course, if you see it, the young people wear the traditional attires of other countries, but never did they wear the indigenous attires or something like that. So there's no problem if they turn up because they cannot really accommodate us. What is the big concern here is when we went there, I went ahead, of course, and there was also the last batch of my delegates who came in late. We entered the mall, and then the security guard prevented this young delegate, the young boy, Ifugao boy from Ifugao, hindi pinapasok sa mall, because he is wearing bahag and of course on a barefoot, and sabi niya he won't allow yung ating delegate kasi some of us still still wearing the traditional attire, pero sa kanya kasi na barefoot siya, pero I cannot understand that situation, pero I complained to the management kung bakit ganon. And of course the mall management cannot, I think they won't even apologize until I wrote them so many letters until they had replied with a memo coming from, or apology letter coming from the security agency. So the security agency is the only answerable to the thing that happened. So I don't know, but I think we could have done more, to have maybe an intervention, maybe conduct some maybe cultural sensitivity training workshop for the employees or the management of the mall. So these are the things that we need to look into, because it's not good for our indigenous peoples and indigenous cultural communities. And of course, let's go back to cultural rights. Actually, the one stipulated is the right to participate in cultural life. If you uphold these cultural rights, and of course it will foster cross-cultural understanding. It can develop cross-cultural understanding, the cultural diversity, and of course the cultural heritage. And of course it can contribute also to the economic and social and political development. Did you know the right to participate in cultural life? Isa itong example, yung there's one indigenous community na he went to school pero hindi siya pinayagan magsuot ng kanyang traditional attire. And of course, he was even banned from speaking the mother tongue, the language. I think parang na-experience din natin last time, when they imposed in the school, na dapat it should be English ang medium ng communication and the medium of instruction. And of course, you will be fine if you speak in your native tongue. So those are the things, I think blatant violation of our cultural rights. Kaya we need to really observe those things, and of course take necessary actions. So how are cultural rights recognized across different ethno-linguistic groups? They are recognized through the local ordinances issued by the local government units, and some national laws such as the IPRA law, and of course the intangible cultural heritage are protected through the heritage law or the Republic Act 10006. But based on the experience that I presented, no, I think there is a need to strengthen these laws. It is through cultural events also and activities, it can provide the opportunity to participate in cultural life. Yun nga, through the experience, no, yun nga, lockdown, of course, na stop lahat ng ating mga cultural engagement. So I think we need to do more, no? I think how to build back better, no? And of course, how do different ethnolinguistic groups recognize cultural practices of others, no? Through the training programs such as schools of living traditions, the cultural practices, and ICH are being recognized through these programs. How do we ensure that the presentation of these different cultures, that their ownership of said practices are recognized? I think there should be a strict enforcement of the laws, no? Intellectual property rights or community intellectual rights shall be observed and to address these issues. And of course, legislate laws that can further address these issues. And of course, actually, the Congress has crafted, no, an act of promoting and safeguarding, no, community intellectual rights. I don't know if nasa plenary lang, pero I think that concludes my presentation for today. And I'd just like to share with you a quote from Nelson Mandela: to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. Again, mabuhay ang mga katutubo, mabuhay ang karapatang pantao. Agyamanaka, Diyos mamahes, Hagyo.
Baguio, Dr. Antonio, maraming salamat po. Basically, Dr. Antonio showed us that there's still so much work to be done, so much on his plate. Actually, I'm really surprised that you gave us a lot of time for your presentation right now, knowing how busy you are. No? And be that as it may, your stories about bahag-wearing individuals being denied their place in society. Well, if you are to ask all of our attendees here who are of indigenous descent, marami silang kwento tungkol dyan. Ako na nga lang, pag nalalaman nila na ako'y taga-Bontoc, it's the reverse eh. They ask me to remove my pants. Okay, so does it have to be like that all the time? Well, anyways, going back here, Dr. Antonio's lecture actually showed us perfect time for this, what we would now refer to as a quasi-ethnic renaissance. The involvement of the youth is very astounding as compared to what we had during the 70s and 80s na halos lahat ng indigenous kinakahiya nila. Ay, nakaigurot, babae ko deta. They would say that. But right now you have full involvement of the youth. But be that as it may, that is not basically the silver lining because we still have a lot of work to do. Nagrarush tayo because majority, if not all of our culture bearers are either very old or already starting to die. So there's still a lot of work to do. Okay, palakpakan po natin lahat ng ating mga speakers ngayong hapon na ito. Let us now move on with our open forum. By the way, I would also like to thank our Facebook attendees for having also sent their questions in. Ayan, magsimula na po tayo, ha? Okay, question number 1 is from Professor Nella Florendo of UP Baguio. And the question is addressed to Dr. Ikin. Doc Ikin, IPRA and FPIC seem to take IPs as homogeneous collectives. Is there any space for individual agency? When Apo Whang-ud agreed to demonstrate tattooing in Manila Art Festival, many reacted to the event as oppressive and a form of prostituting IP culture, while others asserted agency. I've read Dr. Amores' reaction in defense of Whang-ud. Where and how do we demarcate between collective rights and agency? Corollary is misrepresentation of IP committed only by outsiders, or can IPs also misrepresent themselves? Okay, Dr. Amores?
Thank you, Professor Nella, for that question. I think I discussed that elsewhere in another conference about commodification of indigenous cultures. First, there are many trends in the question. One is on agency of Whang-ud. We are used to the idea that traditional tattoos have to have this kind of the rarity of the designs, a specific pattern that is attributed to the group and all others. And it should not be polluted. But what's happening now in Whang-ud's village, there are more than 100 tattoo practitioners already. The youngest I've met is 10 years old to until 23 years old. No, and they are in the cities also tattooing others. So here you can see the transformation of traditional patterns to a different one in the contemporary period. So if I studied the tattoos in 2008 and recorded the traditional patterns, now in 2021, it seems that the traditional names attributed to the designs have been lost, no? Because of the intrusion of tourism, of course, education and modernity. No, so the agents here that I would like to stress is that there is also transformation of these traditional patterns, and in fact, Whang-ud also abbreviated her tattoo designs, no, with the three dots, no, that she would authenticate in the village. Now, if tourists would come and this 100 plus tattoo practitioners would tattoo different patterns, and then she would authenticate. So I think that is a form of agency on her part with the innovations of different designs, the inclusion of different terms on their tattoos. No, of course, you have this idea of the host gaze and the tourist gaze, and then they meet at the center and they appropriate these different patterns. I think there is much agency there in terms of Whang-ud's designs and how this village transformed into a tourism tattoo mecca for the lowlanders and other diasporic Filipinos.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Ikin. We have another question here addressed to Sir FERNAN TALAMAYAN and also to Dr. Salvador-AMORES. The question is, branding and commodifying cultural products, services, etc. have implications on royalties and transfer payments. Do you know of any examples from other countries which have established legal and regulatory regimes that operationalizes royalty and transfer payments? May we first ask Sir FERNAN his thoughts?
The question is, if I understand correctly, it's asking about if I know other countries that has this mechanism. To be honest, I'm not aware. I mean, wala po kong alam na bansa na may ganyang mekanismo. Kasi strictly speaking, yung research ko is mainly focused on the practices sa Tam-awan village. So hindi po siya naging bahagi na exploration ko kung may ganun mang kalakaran. So I think Professor Salvador-AMORES can answer this question better.
Doc Ikin?
Yeah, that's the problem with the indigenous communities in terms of branding and commodification. They don't get any royalties. For instance, Whang-ud is all over. Whang-ud is already a brand name. So, like in the slides that I presented earlier, she is in clothing, coffee labels, sneakers, rubber shoes, what have you, but she doesn't get any royalty as per any image that is printed. No, she doesn't get any royalty. When I asked this, I raised this question in the village and asked her, people are now your brand or your tattoo or even your face is all over different products. No, what do you think about that? But she replied and she said, as long as it puts food on the table, she doesn't have an issue on that. But of course, on the other hand, no, so it should be proper to give royalties, no, to the indigenous communities, but the mechanism is still undefined in our country. No, I like FERNAN. I also isn't unaware if there are indigenous groups who are really doing this. No, the legal and regulatory regimes for royalty transfer payments. No, I know New Zealand has a way, but of course we have to study the mechanism of this. At this time, we're very weak because we do not register our tattoos at the IPR because, like I said, in the visual arts, you have the canvas as a medium and writing or literature on paper, but the medium for tattoos is on the body. So that's also an issue whether that is really copyrightable to gain royalties, no, for the use of these tattoos in different forms.
Thank you very much, Doc Ikin. We have another question here for Doc Edwin from Dayan Mabunga Rodriguez. And the question is, did you have opportunities to organize exchange activities between IP youth and also Moro youth in the Bangsamoro region? Sir Edwin?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, we brought the Cordillerans and other IP groups to Maguindanao. Yeah, they had an interaction with the Maguindanaoans and also Maranao. Yeah, that was part of the Katutubo exchange also. So each year, now we go to different places. So interaction with the community, local community, as well as bringing the different indigenous peoples groups.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
That's the question.
Okay. We have another question here. More or less, this is addressed to everyone, everyone who just presented their works. It's from Joel Dalimag, and it goes, where lies the thin line or the difference between commodification and commercialization of culture and promotion of culture? Local tourism even blurred. How does this actually blur? Actually, in terms of local tourism as it presents culture. Let's start with Dr. Edwin Antonio. Where lies the difference?
This is really a big issue, no, on how to delineate, no, the work of the tourism industry as well as the interest of the cultural communities, no. Dapat sana pag-usapan ng maigi ito para at least we could come up, no. Pero actually there was also a bill, no, House bill that would address, no, yung issue kasi there was an issue about the Cordillera weaves, no. I mean, coming from outside the country, tapos they copied the designs and of course binibenta dito ng mura, and of course that sparked, no, the issue, no, of the discussion in the lower house na kailangan gumawa ng batas para at least ma-address ito, no. It's yun nga yung medyo masalimot itong pag-uusap, so I think there should be a dialogue about this, no, yung commodification and commodification and commercialization and the promotion of culture. So ayan, that's my response to the question.
Okay. Sir Fernan, your thoughts?
Well, what I was trying to explain in my article, which I just presented, is this. I want us to picture it as a landscape. I mean, of course, there's a difference between commodification and yung promotion. I mean, for sure, commodification, may kinikita dyan, di ba? So, may perang involved. Pag promotion, I mean, strictly speaking, we might want to think of it as something as, kung sa ideal na mundo, promotion like simply just presenting or exhibiting something. Diba? Pero sometimes promotion also overlaps with commodification. And that's what I try to unpack. Kasi kung titingnan mo siya sa isang landscape, sa isang buong landscape, and if we consider culture as dynamic, nagbabago, fluid, diba? Baka maganda rin tingnan na yung commodification mismo ay isang aspekto o isang bahagi ng pagpapractice ng isang kultura or ng isang identity. So going back to sa question ng kung may difference ba, yes, strictly speaking, meron, pero kung titingnan mo siya sa bigger picture, perhaps we might want to take it in a different way, like observe it as something that is inherently part of all cultures, that it transforms in time and it evolves in time, and culture bearers will always have that capacity or even the right to have authority doon sa sa either pag-commodify or pag-transform or pag-promote ng kultura nila. So I just see it in the same landscape, like in a one spectrum.
Doc Ikin, your thoughts?
With the commodification, with what's happening in my case study that I presented earlier, when you say commodification by the outsiders, to bring those cultures, no, to sell it without permission from the community, then it becomes commodified and commercialized. But I would like to revert the idea if the IP or the indigenous peoples themselves, no, have this kind of permissive commodification when they themselves actually use their own culture to sell or to gain profit from there. But there is what you call as permissive commodification, and at the same time, you have these outsiders coming in, turning the tattoo, for instance, as a product and commodity. Then you have the locals or the indigenous peoples also taking advantage of that because there are tourists coming in. So both of them are in fact part of this complicity of commodifying cultures. No, so both are two ways with what's happening now in the village of Buscalan, especially with the upsurge or the influx of tourists coming in. And for the IPs, that's the way of gaining something from these tourism activities in the village. No, so that for me that is what you call also as a permissive form of commodification. They allowed it, and you have the outsiders who have the means and resources to commodify their culture. No, so it's a two-way process, I guess.
Since Christmas time is nearing, I think it's not as simple as kids donning on their bahags and doing carolings for a mere peso's worth. Okay, we have more questions. This is for Sir Talamayan from a mystery inquirer. Mystery inquirer. It seems that despite the efforts of the Tam-awan village to empower the formerly exoticized other, it is still noteworthy that the village's quote-unquote founders are the privileged class of the Cordillera society. Kamdas, National Artist Bencab, etc. My question, therefore, is who is really empowered from this lived museum, the exoticized other, or the elite funding and maintaining the said museum? Sir Fernan?
Una, siguro, medyo mahirap i-unpack yung pagturing ng yung mismong term ng privileged class. So I'd rather answer your question on sino yung ina-empower, because that's essentially the focus of my research. And the reason why my research was focused on the performers, the indigenous peoples who perform in the museum, or meron pa nga mga indigenous peoples na hindi performers but they are hired, parang they are given part-time jobs doon sa museum. In that sense, I see it as a form of empowerment. One, for those performers, they are able to exhibit or even change people's minds about the Cordillerans or about their people. Second, empowerment in a sense na they manage to have a form of magkaroon ng capacity to earn. Yan, diba? Kasi karamihan sa mga ito, like historically marginalized, hirap maka-access sa iba't ibang opportunities for employment. So those young Cordillerans are given that platform or that avenue doon sa museum, and that I think is one form of empowerment. Another form of empowerment, halimbawa, marami akong hindi man marami, may ilan ako nakakwentuhan doon na estudyante sila sa Baguio or sa Benguet. At this museum is giving them, bahagi sila ng minority groups, pero estudyante rin sila, wala rin masyadong pera, kaya the museum gives them part-time jobs para they can earn a living. So what I'm trying to explain here is that empowerment comes in different forms, and museums are like Tam-awan Village, living museums like Tam-awan Village, provide platforms for these people to earn a living, and at the same time, perhaps, like for example, in the case of the performers, share their culture to others, and perhaps then share some enlightenment about the culture that they embody.
Thank you, sir. We have another question for Dr. Edwin Antonio. How did you handle the FPIC of these different communities when conducting cultural exchanges across different ethnic groups? Sir?
Yeah, actually, the elders are the ones involved in the invitation. I just forward the invitation to them if they allow them. That of course they are being guided by an elder from their community to accompany these children.
It's usually also activated, initiated by the MIPR, the Mandatory Indigenous Peoples Representative, who is actually very active in the barangay, at the barangay level po. Another question for Dr. Antonio, if you don't mind. Thank you for sharing your experiences of Katutubo Exchange. Also, as part of the NCCA, I understand that you provide grants for researches on IKSPs and other cultural related researches. Is it possible if UP Baguio and NCCA will enter into a MOA regarding this? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And I think everyone is enjoying to submit their proposals. No, we are open every year not to accept research proposals. And I think we need more proposals coming from the cultural communities themselves, no? Para at least they will be empowered. Kasi mukhang lahat ang submissions are coming from the academic institutions. I think we also need to give them the priority to conduct their own research. Community organizations or the IPOs are welcome to submit. Yeah, I don't know the specific. Of course, if you will be given the grants and we can forge an agreement or the MOA. But I don't know if what's the intention of the question. Is MOA between UP? I think it's possible to explore that thing. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. And we have another question for Mr. Talamayan. Should museums be regulated by FPIC, IPRA, and NCIP? From Dr. Ranela Florendo.
Thank you po sa question. Well, i-establish ko po muna na hindi po ako legal expert and I have limited understanding of how the law works in terms of how it protects or promotes our indigenous peoples. I mean, I've read the law, pero to briefly answer the question, kung maganda po siguro munang alamin natin kung ano yung purpose ng regulation. If the regulation will benefit the indigenous peoples or those cultural performers sa museums or the artists in the museums, it will, if the laws or the organizations, I mean, government organizations na will benefit these people, then of course, I mean, all the more that we should regulate it to protect them and to advance their interest. Pero kung minsan kasi may mga regulation din sa Pilipinas na kulang-kulang or may kakulangan o may butas o may problema, at kung hindi naman ito makakatulong sa ating mga indigenous peoples, then I'm not sure what you guys think about it, but to me, sometimes some regulations are not necessary. Pero if the regulations are there to enshrine and protect the indigenous peoples, then of course they should spaces should be regulated.
Thank you, sir. This question is addressed to all three speakers. From Tyrene Basal. What is your opinion regarding the Igorot Stone Kingdom? I think this is the one located in Longlong, wherein they used Igorot architecture, but the design used is of the European castle, and the LGU is even promoting it as a new tourist attraction. Let's start with Professor Ikin Amores.
I haven't been there actually. I haven't seen it. I'm very, very curious how it looks like. But I think as part of the tourism projects of the LGU, the ideal really is to promote authentic Igorot, representations there. But maybe they are adjusting to the tastes of the millennials and of course those the tourists coming there, so might as well support it, but of course they can tweak it a bit, no, if they are, first of all, we have to ask what's the purpose of having this design. Maybe the owners of these ones have their taste, no, for doing this. So I guess well, if it's a destination that makes you happy, why not? And as long as they're not violating any IP culture, then that should be fine.
Sure, Edwin, your thoughts?
This is a fusion of the East and the West, I think. Yeah, I don't know what's the intention of this tourist attraction, but I think to attract some tourists, but I don't know if there could be an issue of maybe bastardization of the traditional architecture if you infuse some other elements, no. Pero the intention is just to maybe encourage everyone to see what's new about having Igorot architecture with the European designs. Okay. Thank you.
Sure, FERNAN?
I've not been there. I've not visited the place, and I have not even seen it online or even a picture. So, pasensya na po, hindi ko po alam yung lugar. Pero, if I will perhaps look at it sa perspective ng Tam-awan village, or I'm not sure, whichever living museum or museums for indigenous peoples, then whatever's there, I treat it as something, as a product of a culture. At kung ano man yung ma-produce nila ron, it's a culture within itself. It's a reality within that self. So regardless kung may bastardization man, tulad na sinabi ni Doc Nina, or may transformation man, I think the museum in its own right has the capacity and has the right to perhaps express a certain reality or culture there. But again, paglilinaw po, hindi pa po ako nakapunta ron at hindi ko po alam yung lugar.
Well, taking into consideration that a lot of Igorots really take pride in this culture of kabiti and the topang, as they would say in Ifugao, it would be nice to see how Igorot stoneworks are applied to maybe public works, highways, sidewalks, etc. Well, Igorot Stone Kingdom is another, but it simply implies that it is also applicable as a cultural methodology in applied practices, so to speak. Now we have another question here for Mr. FERNAN from Sabrina Tan. Tam-awan village reminds me of the Formosan Aboriginal cultural village in Nantao country in Taiwan, though the latter is essentially an amusement park. Would you know what are the views of the IP groups in Taiwan about that cultural village, quote unquote? Do they also not mind being objectified as mere entertainment? I raise this question because I noticed you're doing your PhD in Taiwan.
Right. Thanks for the question. When I actually, if I may share, if we have time, the reason why I did my PhD in Taiwan is because I wanted to expand this research of mine, Tam-awan village, and compare it with the Formosan Aboriginal culture village. But then never had the chance to visit this museum, this amusement park in Taiwan. It's located at the heart of Taiwan. Changed my dissertation topic, changed my supervisor, history happened, so I'm doing other research now. So I, as much as I wanted to learn or know about what the IP groups in Taiwan think about commodification or the way their culture are being exhibited, I have no information about that so far. But from what I've heard, many performers there are kind of employed too, or some of them are not necessarily part of the indigenous peoples, but looking at the cultural dynamics in Taiwan, a lot of Taiwanese have already intermarried with the indigenous peoples, and some indigenous peoples in Taiwan did not necessarily. Some of them did not necessarily take pride about being part of that indigenous people. So I don't know what happens in that amusement park. But I can imagine that since it is part of an amusement park, then of course they exhibit what has been considered as traditional or sacred icons being part of the entertainment. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sir FERNAN. Last question. For Dr. Salvador-Amores, if there are no legal/regulatory regimes, transfer payments, royalties for cultural products and services, is it feasible to establish one locally for now, especially in heavily visited sites like in Whang-ud's area in Kalinga? Ikin?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, they have community initiated regulations based on their culture. So they invoke traditional practices to regulate the visits of tourists coming in. There is also what you call as multa, or you have to be fined if you violate certain rules. So like recently, those groups who are organizing tours or tattoo sessions outside of Buscalan, there are some regulations already in place with the elders there. And the recent phenomenon about Nas Daily 2 days ago, the group of Nas Daily went there to butcher 2 carabaos as a peace offering, or piece of, is that the right term? Maybe a reconciliation gift to the community, where they butchered the carabao and there were festivities as a form of reconciliation from Nas Daily. So all of these regulations are in place, but if you're talking about the royalties and others, like I said, we are it's not in their ethos not to do these things. No, it's just the outsiders, or us, the Westerner, a kind of Western point of thinking to that. Yeah, so meron ng community initiated regulations in place in the area. Indigenous ways of control.
peace offering at that, Ma'am Ikin.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think there aren't any more questions. Okay. Oh, we have one more. No? With regards to our existing policies and laws on cultural heritage and cultural community rights, how urgent is it to have a review of policies and laws that govern IP rights? And let's have this as a last question to be answered by our speakers. Let's start with Ma'am Ikin.
That's the current research that we are undertaking now about the IPRA and how does that impact intangible and tangible cultural heritage of the IPs. So there's a lot of things to do, the revisions, review, and hopefully a very strong implementation of these policies to the indigenous communities. The problem there is some of our indigenous communities are unaware of their bundled rights, that they have rights, that they can go to the NCIP, they can go to the IPR to register or patent, for instance, their designs in textiles, if it's tangible, their tattoos, they can do that. And others, like the geographic indicators of the Philippines, from Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao's geographic indicators are unique features or products found in a certain community, and you can actually register that. Many communities, indigenous communities, are still unaware of the how-tos, the process of doing it. So there should be more awareness of these policies that are already in place. We just need to invoke them for the benefit of the indigenous communities. Even them, they are not aware of this bundled rights as stipulated under IPRA. So we should carefully study the laws and inform the indigenous communities about their rights and how to implement this in a manner that would benefit all the communities.
Sir FERNAN?
Professor Salvador-Amores already put everything in place. I mean, ang ganda na ng pagkaka-phrase. Pero siguro kung magdadagdag na lang ako, I believe that apart from making the indigenous peoples aware of this laws in place, I think the law itself should also be aware of this nuanced understanding of culture that culture is dynamic. When you preserve something, sometimes it can transform, and we should give all this authority, like authority to transform a culture sa mga indigenous people. So other than that, wala na siguro kung may dadagdag sa ngayon.
Sure. Sir Edwin?
Yes, hello. Yes, nasabi din nila. Actually, yung taking from the statement of Dr. Amores, no, yung I think we need to help to educate also the indigenous peoples groups, no, yung hindi pa aware ng kanilang mga rights, no. I think very crucial yun. I think we need to help them, of course. And I hope na sana pumasa na rin yung ating yung proposed bill, no, sa lower house, no, yung an act safeguarding and promoting the community intellectual rights. Kasi hindi ka pwedeng magpa-patent ng isang community intellectual rights kung hindi naman sa iyo individually. So I think we have to also work hand in hand with the IPO field, no, kung ano yung pwedeng masabi nila dito, kasi medyo masalimot itong usapin, no, about intellectual property rights as well as community intellectual rights. So mas maibayo pang pag-uusap at dialogue ang dapat gawin din dito. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat po, sir. Marami pang magpapahabol ng mga komentary nila. Sige, paunlakan na natin dahil marami pa naman po tayong oras. Konti na lang po. So, Dr. Lea Abaya would like to stress certain points concerning a comment sent by Wills Palarca. What do the speakers think about the comment on the chat box by Wills Palarca, which implies promotion in practical sense is a precursor to commodification? Any of our speakers would like to comment on this? Promotion in practical sense is a precursor to commodification. Sir Fernan, would you like to give your thoughts? Parang recitation na tuloy ang nangyayari dito. Diyos ko. Sige.
Precursor. So para bang ano to, we wanted to look at it in a sense na may sequence. Like for example, when you promote something, then it necessarily leads to commodification. It's in my understanding, well, it's a case-to-case basis for sure. I mean, commodification happens as I'm talking about culture bearers, kasi syempre may dinidescribe din kanina si Professor Salvador-AMORES na commodification by an outsider. So when I speak about commodification in my research, it's mostly about the culture bearers commodifying their culture. And when culture bearers commodify their culture, when they see that need, I think it's a part of a recognition na rin na when they promote their culture, they use it as a means to earn a living din. I mean, in a capitalist society, in the system that the society works now, inevitable naman na humanap na means yung tao to survive. And if they deem it possible na they can survive by promoting their culture and by commodifying their culture, then we can look at it as maybe part of the sequence. Pero of course, meron ding iba na when you promote something, you do not necessarily set it as a precursor for commodification. So, but that's not covered by my research. So the way I understand commodification, it's a means for culture bearers to adapt in the system, like the current capitalist system, and at the same time survive and promote. But while surviving, they at the same time promote their culture to other people. So maybe Professor Salvador-AMORES have more thoughts about this.
Yeah, so promotion does not necessarily lead to commodification, because like what I said earlier, there's also a part among the indigenous peoples that promoting and commodifying their culture is also a form of empowerment to engender their identity as IPs. For instance, like a very good example is the case of Whang-ud and the 100+ other tattoo artists doing their tattoo on lowland people and diasporic Filipinos. No, so that in itself, no, the 100 young tattoo artists is a form of empowerment. No, first they promote their culture of traditional tattooing. Second, they welcome non-boot or tourists coming into the area. They are tattooed, and then of course they earn income from there. No, so most of the people that I interviewed actually help them, help their families or help their studies. No, and then they become professionals from this tattooing. So I feel that I think that promotion of does not necessarily lead to commodification. It also empowers, no, people with the kind of permissive, like I said, the permissive commodification that is going on in that case. No, there. I think that's my brief answer for that.
Sir Edwin, any thoughts?
Pag promotion is especially on the mandate of NCCA kasi we're here to preserve, develop and promote. Hanggang doon kasi we are concerned of transmission of the indigenous knowledge to the next generation kasi pag nawala ito, so paano mo rin siya ipipreserve kung hindi mo siya ipopromote? So that's my thought on that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. We have another comment here with a question, actually, if you don't mind me reading, from Carmen Cheryl Dinay Daitak Yangot. Appropriation is a murky area. It's appropriation when a dominant culture uses an element of another culture in ways different from what it was originally intended for. And if an element is taken out of context, all this regardless of the ethnicity doing the appropriation, whether it's a non-IP or an IP. And then we have the matter on FPIC. I feel ambivalence towards this tool because there have been many instances where the FPIC, instead of being a shield to protect the agency of indigenous peoples, sometimes it becomes a state apparatus to legitimize the entrance development projects or ventures, for example, mining, development, aggressions, etc. But I thank Dr. Eakin for pointing out the importance of self-determination because that is the essence of indigenous struggle. Nothing about us without us that we decide. Because IKSPs are collective, we need the consent of the community on matters IKSP. With that, a question. My question is in getting consent, whose consent do we get as far as the IKSP is concerned? I think Sir Edwin Antonio has experience concerning this. Any thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think you go back, you go to the community and of course ask the permission. And of course, if you really need the FPIC, of course, you go to NCIP. And of course, each time that you conduct research, no, kasi ito yung kailangan talaga na FPIC for all the research activities na gagawin sa community. And of course, you need to go back to them for validation. Of course, present the output of your study. Yun po yung aking sagot. Thank you.
Prof. Eakin, any thoughts?
Okay, so that's again a very interesting question. No? So the how the FPIC model actually should serve as a shield, but at the same time, it also put the researchers at a disadvantage. The reason why I said that because the issue of consent. No, consent is a very subjective term. No, consent can be, for instance, you talk to the elders, they give you consent. Is getting tattooed in the village of Whang-ud a form of consent? Is getting adopted in the village, no, a form of consent? And then you have the legal norms. You have to fill in a lot of documents, pay fees, etc. No, to get your certificate of precondition. So sometimes we are interpreting consent in different ways, in different forms. But if you follow the NCIP, which stipulates that you have to secure permission or consent from the community to conduct the research, no? That's also a protection for both the community and the researcher because it's kind of, double checking, no, the results of your research, no, like what Dr. Antonio said, should be returned to the community. So that's an assurance. But in reality, when the researchers have secured their FPIC, they gathered information from the village, they published their work. We don't know if this is actually returned to the communities. We don't know what happened to the raw data, the photographs, the recording that researchers would gather, would acquire from the field. So that's the problem also in the FPIC. There are weak provisions there on how to run after visitors, researchers who collected data from the field. We don't have the means. NCIP and the FPIC doesn't have the means to run after. Unless you're a popular NAS daily, you can do that. But what about the others who have done researches in the area? I respect those researchers who, with dedication, clarity, respect, purpose, in doing the research, have returned all of these results to the community. I have a very high regard to them. But my question is, what about those who ran away with the data and never returned?
That's a well introduced point, Ma'am Ikin. Well, believe it or not, a lot of our indigenous communities right now are suffering from what we would refer to as research fatigue, to the point that they have defined their own free prior FPIC. Actually, if you go uphill in Benguet, they would say FPIC. If one says no, everybody says no. That's the agreed upon incentive there. So basically, we still have a lot to learn as far as the application of FPIC is concerned. In fact, there are certain issues where a community member would do a research on his or her community, and still they have to obtain an FPIC. These are nitty-gritty legal nuances actually that people really have to know, specifically when conducting researches here in indigenous communities. So be that as it may, I would like to send my apologies for those of you who would really like to provide more questions, but I think we are already pressed for time. And of course, we already have our link for the evaluation forms available at the chat box, if you don't mind. So with all that, palakpakan po natin ang ating mga speakers. Alam ko, pasensya na, pinagod po kayo ng aming mga inquirers. Ayan, palakpakan po natin sila. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. And maraming salamat po sa pagdalo ninyo sa session ito ng ating for this event. With everything else, good afternoon and thank you for attending.
Somebody's raising a hand. Still. Give a chance. There are questions also from the PhD.
Ayan. Sir Joaquin kami rin. Last na ito, wala na. Last na. Nabanlog di kita yung speaker tayo.
Regarding sa free prior informed consent, ito yung isa sa na-violate ng Department of Education, which marami ho tayong kinukuha na indicator or information sa community na hindi ho appropriate doon sa IKSP or sa customary laws, na sana ho makita natin bago natin ilagay siya sa module or lesson plan, dapat na-validate kasi mayroon ho tayong national customary laws and local customary laws na dapat nating bigyan ng pansin.
Totally agree ako dyan, Joaquin. No? So kailangan may validation.
Both the national and the region or even the local community, ma'am. Kasi just like bayanihan system, that is national customary law. Yung pagmano po natin is national practice. Maraming indicator na hindi lang isang community o isang ethnic group ang gumagamit nito. So, dapat nating pag-usapan diyan from the beginning. Dito siguro magsimula sa community going to national. So, para makita natin what is the purpose of the IPIC and of course our national programs regarding this. Kasi for me as a culture bearer, nakita ko kanina in the morning yung tinatanong between the church and the spiritual vision ng mga IPs. Wala naman ho tayong dapat ikabahala doon kasi we are all understand that yung mga ninuno natin is pagan. That's why dito nga sa historical background ng IP is 1904 na tinatawag tayong non-Christian tribe, di ba? I am correct, ma'am?
Yes.
Yes. So, mabuti siguro, ma'am, is baga i-screen out natin yung local going to national for collaboration with the CHED and the DepEd, as well of the National Commission on Indigenous People, at andun pa rin yung National NCCA as well as sa LGU unit natin, ma'am.
Yeah. Dapat community-led ang research
Yes.
natin.
At saka, respetuhin na naman sana ng mga government agency yung Section 50 ng EPRA, which ito yung sinasabi na dapat indigenous people or bona fide member ng IP yung magiging representative or focal person ng mga IPs. Kasi pag non-IP, kasi hindi mo siya talaga madigin eh. Especially in the military base, kasi meron tayong EO70 or conflict and sensitive education.
Yes. Thank you
So
for
now,
your comment. Thank you.
makita ng different agencies. Kasi ang tagal eh, ang tagal. For me, if we die, the culture and tradition of the Filipinos is die, we are all die. Wala naman eh, wala na tayo. Hindi naman sinasabi natin we are not accept for the innovation of technology, pero andun pa rin yung ang sarap pakinggan as nakaka-proud na your culture, your innate mo pa rin yung culture ng pagiging Filipino eh. Kasi indigenous people education and the integrated school system of education is not only for IP, it, of course ito po ang program na to ay nasa lahat ng Filipinos. Hindi kasi nabibigyan tayo ng wrong interpretation of the law na hindi lang sana ito, this is non-bias, or wala tayong pina-priority or neglect or deprived na non-IP dito kasi we are all Filipinos and we stand for it.
Okay. Totally agree.
Tama yan. At Sir Joaquin, wag sana rin natin kalimutan that once upon a time we were and we are all indigenous. And that's something we tend to forget as a community. Yan. Thank you very much po sa inyong komento, Sir Joaquin.
Thank you din po.
And then I will also again would like to thank our speakers for this afternoon, Dr. Edwin Antonio, Sir FERNAN TALAMAYAN, and Dr. Ikin SALVADOR-AMORES. Maraming salamat po. And we hope to see you tomorrow again for another set of our lectures for this set. Magandang hapon po sa lahat, and thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ikin, Fernan, and Edwin.
Thank you po. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Sir Ayo, Matthew, at saka Ben. Maraming salamat, Ben.
Thank you, Sir Ben, for the speakers.
Thank you, Kenyayo, Matthew, Ben, thank you.
Sige po,
Leia,
thank you
you.
po.
Salamat.
Manang Jade, pinakandak gayam ni Maki mga madanagan.
Oo, kasi baka kumutong ka.
So, nga rin.
Ayun,